Hi, I'm the Space Quest historian. Settle in, kids, cause it's debate club time. One of the most contentious issues in the Space Quest fandom has always been the supposed heroism of its main character, Roger Wilco. Is he a hero or an anti-hero? Are his motivations selfless, or is he just looking to save his own ass? Along for the ride is my friend and colleague, Highbury Hazard. Say hello to the nice people out there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Historian.
You're very welcome. Now, I've brought Mr. Hazard on to offer a different perspective on the topic of this video because I have one opinion and he has another. And for once I thought I'd actually be fair and balanced rather than sarcastically appropriating that title, so here's what's gonna happen. I'm going to present my case in my usual rambling, incoherent fashion, and then I'll turn the mic over to Mr. Hazard to offer an opposing but equally interesting viewpoint on the matter, and then you can decide for yourself which side you land on, or if both sides have merit, or if you just don't give a fuck. Okay, let's go. As I mentioned, the topic of Roger's supposed heroism has been an ongoing discussion since the early days of the Space Quest forums back in the 90s. So, is Roger Wilco a hero? Well, sure he is. He's the protagonist of the series, and he's saved the galaxy and his home planet on multiple occasions across space and time, not to mention the lives of his creators, the two guys from Andromeda, ensuring that they would continue their existence as employees at that prestigious software company Sierra Online and create more Space Quest games for him to star in. Yeah, that last part is a bit meta, just roll with it. But is he a hero in the traditional sense? Like, is he a knight in shining armor who valiantly rides into danger and comes out the other end victorious thanks to his unfaltering bravery? Arguably, no. Roger doesn't find himself in treacherous situations because he actively seeks them out. He finds himself in danger because danger finds him. At the start of Space Quest 1, he wakes up to find his fellow crew members dead and the ship's self-destruct sequence activated. Since he has no way of switching it off, and since the hallways of the ship are patrolled by murderous alien marauders, he has no other recourse but to haul ass down to the escape pod bay and get the fuck out of Dodge. During the course of the game, as well as the next 3 games in the series, Roger tries to find his way back to his home planet, but is repeatedly confronted with perilous and potentially lethal situations, including, but not limited to, killer spider droids, killer root monsters, killer floor scrubbers, killer sewer slime, killer sea slugs, and let's not forget to mention the sentient creatures that also want to see him dead, like the Sarian Marauders, the CEO of Scumsoft Elmo Pug, the sequel policeman, and of course his arch nemesis Sludge Vohal. It's here that I would argue that Roger is a victim of circumstance, and he's really only forced to overcome these obstacles because otherwise he'll never see his own planet again, much less draw another breath. In other words, he didn't ask for any of this. Fate, or whatever cosmic bearer of misfortune you may choose to believe in, just continues to throw roadblocks at him that he has no other choice but to deal with. And in that sense, I don't think he's a hero, at least not by choice, because he didn't choose to be in these situations. His actions are more about self-preservation than heroism. Sure, he does set off to infiltrate the Delta in the first game to stop the Sarians from using the star generator to wipe out planets. He defeats Sludge Vohal in Space Quest 2 and rescues the 2 guys from Andromeda in Space Quest 3 and saves the life of his unborn son in Space Quest 4, but I would argue that all of those escapades were in the name of self-preservation, not selfless acts of heroism. If he doesn't stop the Sarians, his home planet is toast, so he has no home to go back to. In Space Quest 2, Vohal commandeers his shuttle and essentially forces Roger to go head-to-head with the mad scientist under threat of death. Space Quest 3 has him rescue his creators, but that's just because he would effectively cease to exist without them. And in Space Quest 4, his ass would have been toast at the hands of the secret police if his future son hadn't showed up and shoved him into a time rip. All of that, in my opinion, boils down to a guy who's forced to take action simply because he wants to go on existing. Now, all of that changed with Space Quest 5. Suddenly Roger isn't the unwilling hero that the universe keeps dumping on. He's not the lazy protagonist who has to sink or swim in order to escape circumstances beyond his control. In Space Quest 5, Roger seemingly made it back to his home planet and decided to enroll in the StarCon Academy in the hopes of becoming a starship captain. Where that ambition from a guy who used to sleep on the job in broom closets comes from is never explained, and to me it's a jarring juxtaposition in terms of his character. Now, the title of this video is Did Space Quest 5 Ruin Roger Wilco's Character? And admittedly, there is some hyperbole to that statement. Space Quest 5 didn't outright ruin the character, but it did introduce a level of outright heroism and good guy aspirations to a character who, in the past 4 games, didn't seem too concerned about anything other than his personal well-being. And Space Quest 5 doesn't offer any explanation as to why Roger suddenly decided to make something of himself. It just starts in medias res at the Academy with Roger taking his final test before assuming command of the SCS Eureka. Now, granted, there are still some trademarks of Roger's predilection towards shirking responsibilities. The opening text mentions him sleeping through classes and not bothering to actually study for his exams. In fact, the only reason why he's awarded his own starship is because he cheats on his exam, and then some sort of rodent causes a malfunction in the Great-O-Matic machine, which leads him to achieving a perfect score on the final exam, which implies that, despite cheating on the exam, he wasn't actually supposed to land the gig as starship captain in the first place. But even so, the drive to actually enroll in the academy, and then when shit hits the fan with Captain Quirk and the mutagenic ooze, spring into action and save the day, seems like a left-field evolution of the character that, to me at least, doesn't feel earned. Now, Scott Murphy, who wrote the first 4 games, wasn't involved in the making of Space Quest V, which goes some way to explain why the character of Roger Wilco has undergone some changes in personality. Instead, the other half of the Two Guys from Andromeda duo, Mark Crow, was in charge of this game. But still, to imply that Mark just simply doesn't understand the character which he co-created with Scott seems implausible, since he was part of the series development from the beginning. So, what happened? Well, my friend Highbury Hazard has a theory, and also a dissenting viewpoint. In his opinion, Roger's not just a hero by intent, but the change in his character is actually the result of a much overlooked personal growth situation. So, I'll let him explain.
Let me start off by setting the record straight that I am fully aware that my opinion is a very unpopular one, and I am aware that I am entering into this conversation with by far the most recognized Space Quest historian, so by no means am I coming into this with a closed mind, but rather to present a side of the argument which I think people should at least consider. I'm not here trying to change anybody else's mind, and honestly, I think it's actually the mark of a great series that fans can come away with it with different views. So I don't want anybody thinking that the points I make are combative or meant as a way to try to invalidate anybody else's opinion, but I just happen to think that maybe the points I make are also a valid approach to seeing the series in a way that I'm quite content with how all 5 games played out. Now, keep in mind, all my arguments are based on my experience and expectations alone, and I cannot speak to or comment on what may or may not have been intended by either of the 2 guys from Andromeda. Furthermore, there is a chance that something I say might have contradictory information in the games, and all I can say to that is, well, I guess you'd be right to reject my views, as that would be the first plot hole we've ever seen in Space Quest. Anyways, let's get to it. The main crux of my standpoint is that if we look at all 5 of the Space Quest games as a cohesive series, then Roger's arc makes sense. And even if Roger in Space Quest V is not the same Roger we saw in Space Quest 1, it's for all the right reasons. When we look at character development in general, it's not out of the question for characters to change based on their circumstances. Some of the most interesting characters we've seen in all forms of media are those that end up very different from how they started, something writers can get away with so long as the steps on the journey are in line with each other through a logical progression. Now, in Space Quest 1, I agree with what you said about his initial primary motivation being self-preservation for the most part, and that goes for roughly the first 2/3 of the game, so no need to retread that ground. But where our views diverge is that I do not see his decision to stop the Sarians as mere self-preservation, but rather as a call to action. He has a ship and a pilot droid, and he has the freedom to choose to defend his home or go off on his own and start a new life. The difference between this moment and everything in the game previous to this point is that Roger, as a character, has a choice. Now, given the limitations of adventure games at the time, we, the player, are obviously shoehorned into having to make that decision. But in universe, we can imagine that at that moment, Roger is free to fly around as he pleases. It may not have been programmed into the game, but hypothetically, Roger can just stick around until eventually he talks to a bar patron who gives him the sector coordinates for Hedonia X, the harem planet. Hell, in a sense, we can literally opt to just stay in the Yulin's flats, drinking beer and gambling ad infinitum, but I play games to escape my regular day-to-day life. So ultimately, Roger does make the choice, and we have a pretty sweet character arc already in the first game. The lazy, unmotivated janitor makes the decision to take action and save the galaxy, and if the series never went any further, we would have a complete story with a feel-good ending. And then we move on to Space Quest 2. Yeah, okay, so Space Quest 2, I agree, basically entirely self-preservation to the best of my memory. Now that we put it that way, that's probably why I find it the least interesting game out of the 5 Space Quests in the series, although I do admit that it's nevertheless a fun game and cool story and what I consider the best-looking art from the AGI era. But in this one, yeah, he is a bit of a flatter character because it's really just about a guy who doesn't want to die, which is funny because it's a Sierra game. He's going to die a lot. Like, a lot. So then we move on to Space Quest 3. Space Quest 3 starts with Roger acting out of self-preservation, but once he escapes a junk freighter, he is just kind of chilling for the most part. It only just so happens that a killer android has been assigned to hunt him down. And even then, that's basically just an injected subplot while Roger doesn't really have anything more pressing to do. Honestly, if it hadn't been for Arnold getting all up in Roger's business, Roger's basically spending his time buying tourist crap, eating fast food, and playing video games. Again, maybe perhaps a bit too relatable for me. The point is, now that Roger is free from the freighter, he's really just trying to live his best life, and honestly, he has no reason to do otherwise. That is, until he finds a distress signal programmed into an arcade game as an Easter egg, and once again makes the decision to take the call to action. Alternatively, Roger can entirely miss the Easter egg, at which point the story becomes him just bumbling across the rest of the story by being the worst tourist in the galaxy, but canonically, everything he does from here is his choice to do so. And here again we come to a fork between you and me, this time in our interpretations of the ending of Space Quest 3. While you've read it as being Roger saving his creators for self-preservation, I think that brings up the following counterpoints. Number 1, he didn't know they're his creators until the end of the game, and 2, he still doesn't know they're his creators at the end of the game. From his perspective, he just saved 2 random game designers and helped them get a job. There's nothing anywhere that tells Roger that these are the guys who designed Space Quest and that they created the universe in which all of them exist. In fact, all the ending really implies to me is that 2 guys from somewhere not here got a job at Sierra and would eventually make a game series that would adapt the story and adventures of the guy who saved them. This does have to assume that the game skipped a cutscene somewhere in which Roger actually gives them his entire life story, but I find it safe to fill in those blanks and say that that's what happened. Anyways, Space Quest 4 is pretty much just self-preservation again, and damn it, I think I've just now realized why I like 2 and 4 less than everybody else did. But again, 4 is a fantastic game, nothing at all against it, it's perfectly fine, it's hilarious, etc, etc. But when a series consists entirely of 5 awesome games, when given the task of ranking them, something has to be at the relative bottom, even if they are amazing games in their own right. But yeah, Roger just spends the whole game trying his best not to die. And again, we as Sierra fans laugh at that statement because we know how many times Roger actually does die in order for us to get our shit together and finish the damn game. Basically, before we even get to the installation of Space Quest 5, you and I see Roger differently. And based on my view of Roger as a guy who steps up to the occasion when faced with a decision, we can't simply ignore that Space Quest 4 is the game that introduced the idea that Roger has more to live for than the spur of the moment, and has to step up to making that future a reality. It's the ending of 4 that says that Roger will eventually meet Beatrice, they presumably get married, and they produce a son who will eventually go back in time to save Roger's life so that Roger can save the galaxy. And so, once confronted with the fact that he has to eventually have a child with the most beautiful woman he's ever seen but hasn't even met yet, not only do I think it doesn't make sense for Roger to continue his life as a lazy slacker, but choosing to do better with his life is actually self-preservation. Roger didn't necessarily join the academy in order to become a hero, he just wanted to be more than just a janitor. He didn't seem to be particularly driven to be a captain, but neither would Roger turn down an opportunity that flukes itself his way. The game does suggest in passing that becoming a captain was Roger's childhood dream, but clearly it's one that he's never actively pursued in his life. But it seems to me as though being the literal hero of a galaxy multiple times over might have actually given him some confidence to get his life together. Now, I admit that the game did take a bit of a goofier tone than its predecessors, and I understand that people got a bit bent out of shape over that, and I can't really say much to that other than, hey, you know what? I myself have experienced some pronounced tonal shifts between different eras of my life, you know? So, on one hand, yes, he's a bit of a bumbling character in 5, but to best of my recollection, he mostly only really becomes an overt goof at moments when he's trying to impress others, especially when he's around Beatrice or his crew. But this doesn't really break his character when you consider that he's never really been put into this social situation before. He's only really been shown as a loner in the previous games, which would certainly explain why he's completely awkward when he actually has to build relationships with others all of a sudden. And it's not like Roger has never been bumbling before. If the player makes him step off ledges or slide down spaceship windows or shuffle dance his way across unstable rock bridges, we do see a more clumsy side of Roger. Many of these moments are optional, but they exist. Besides, it's not like Roger isn't still his resourceful self when it's required of him. He single-handedly defeats WD-40, he beats Captain Quirk at a game of Space Battleship, He rescues Cliffy from incarceration using a packet of space monkeys. He uncovers the secret story behind the primordial ooze. And he assists in the rescue of the Goliath's crew. And then, with his life and future wife intact, he calls it a day and makes a choice not to investigate any further into the primordial ooze, because that's somebody else's problem now. So, has Roger grown to be the man he has the potential to be? Yes. Does he still have characteristics of his old goofy slacker self? Also yes. And so, then, the series ends. The series ends right there. And so you have it. A perfect 5-game series that ends right there and does not continue any further than that. Now, I totally get how people can default to a mindset that Roger should be a stagnant character in the tradition of the pulp sci-fi shows that the series has been channeling. But I propose that, as a finite 5-part series that consists only and entirely of 5 games, it's to the story's credit that Roger Wilco grows and develops into a satisfying character arc that sees the underdog have his day in the end.
Thank you, Mr. Hazard. Well, that's it really. I don't have any clever or pithy way to wrap this up. I'm just going to leave you with these 2 viewpoints and let you decide for yourself. We'd love to hear what you think, of course, so yeah, there's the comment section down below if you want to tell us how wrong we are or what part you agreed with. Until next time, I'm the Space Quest Historian. Go check out Highbury Hazard's Twitch channel, because he plays games too, and he's actually quite good at them. There's a link to his channel in the description down below, and I'll see you around the Chrono Stream. Bye!
You motherfucker.